Good morning, everyone. I'll call to order this regular meeting of our Zoning and Planning Committee. Today is March 16th, 2017. I'm Lisa Bender. I chair the committee, and we have a quorum today with council members Reich, Goodman, Andrew Johnson, and Council President Johnson. We have 6 items on today's agenda. The first 3 items are each for public hearing, and that includes the site plan review condition of approval appeal for 4714 Cedar Avenue, variance and subdivision appeal for 3006 West 40th Street, and demolition of historic resource appeal for 2620 West 44th Street. We will return to those items in a moment after the consent agenda. The consent agenda is items 4 and 5. Item number 4 is approving an application for a rezoning at 3416 Chicago Avenue South to R4 to allow for a triplex. And item number 5 is approving the reappointments to the City Planning Commission for 5 individuals who are currently serving on that body. So I will move items 4 and 5, see if there's any discussion. Seeing none, all those in approval, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Those 2 items carry. And I will just note that we do have a discussion item at the end, which is an update of our city's comprehensive plan. I will return to that after the public hearing. So with that, we'll start with item number 1 with a staff report, and then we will open the public hearing. I do want to note that we had a request for an American Sign Language interpreter, which we do have provided. If anyone needs it, you could talk with the clerk, Diana, there at the end, so we can get that set up in the right kind of way. And this is our interpreter. Thank you for being here. Ma'am, do you think it's necessary to sign the announcement that we have an interpretation? Okay, thank you.
Good morning, Chair Bender, committee members. My name is Peter Crandall. I'm a city planner in CPED land use. The appeal before you today concerns a site at 4700 to 4714 Cedar Avenue South. This was a site plan review application that was recommended and approved at the February 21st City Planning Commission meeting. The zoning on the site, as you can see from the zoning map here, is C2. The proposal is for a new 2,300 square foot commercial building with a drive-through facility. Drive-throughs are an allowed use in the C2 zoning district. A little context on the site. It's at the intersection of Cedar Avenue South and 47th Street in South Minneapolis. This is the site as it stands today. There are currently 2 buildings on the site. The applicant proposes to demolish the building on the southernmost parcel, which you can see here in the street view of the site, and to construct a separate new 2,300 square foot commercial building. The originally recommended approved site plan is shown here with an entrance, one-way drive-through entrance off of Cedar Avenue and a one-way drive-through exit off of Cedar Avenue. At the both of those curb cuts are 12 feet in width. At the February 21st City Planning Commission, the Commission added an 11th condition to the approved site plan, which states that in addition to a curb cut along 47th Street, the project shall be limited to 1 curb cut on Cedar Avenue, limited to 12 feet 2 inches as designed in the site plan, and limited to a one-way exit only. That condition would thus require all vehicles entering the site to use the 47th Street curb cut at the north end of the parking lot for the retail building. This is a site plan provided by the applicant. The applicant is appealing that particular condition in the site plan approval. This is a proposed alternative that the applicant is providing today, which closes the entrance curb cut on Cedar Avenue South and proposes to widen the exit curb cut to 22 feet at the southern end of the site. We received some feedback from Public Works on that proposed alternative. They do not see a 22-foot curb cut as approvable, but they would approve what is shown here as a potential alternative, which is a 14-foot curb cut that is shifted to the south of the drive aisle as a one-way exit alternative to the site. I believe the applicant is here. The applicant's representative is here today to speak to the issue, but I'll take any questions before that.
Are there any questions for staff? Okay, we'll start with the applicant then. How many people would like to speak on this item? Okay, thank you. So we'll have the applicant come on up.
Good morning. My name is Mark Thiroff. I represent the applicant, August Ventures, LLC. I wanted to put our plan back up if I could. Having a hard time finding the Zoom, but I think you can see it on your screens. Just for point of clarification, we did offer an alternative in our appeal, which involved widening the exit onto Cedar to 2 lanes. But principally, we're here this morning to ask you to take a look at the additional condition that was added at the Planning Commission level, which was the closure of the entrance off of Cedar. That plan came out of a series of meetings with staff. I think we had at least 3 meetings with staff, including at the last meeting we had a representative from Public Works there who saw our plan. We got no negative feedback on it, no suggestion that the entrance off of Cedar that you see here was in any way a problem. We incorporated all the feedback that we got and believed that that was the best plan for the property, particularly in terms of on-site traffic movements as well as ingress and egress from Cedar. If you close this entrance here, all of the traffic, as Mr. Crandall mentioned, all the entrance traffic has to come in off of 47th. So you're going to have people traveling south on Cedar who have to take a right onto 47th and immediately, immediately a left into the parking lot. Whereas with our approach and the entrance on Cedar, you'll have the ability for traffic to just enter directly from Cedar and not have to make those 2 movements. Without that entrance, you'll have people who will not notice the business that they want to get to until it's too late to enter at 47th. So they'll either end up doing a U-turn on Cedar to get back to enter into the coffee shop, or they'll take a right through the neighborhood and hook back to 47th to come in that way. Or possibly there's another coffee shop further down on 47th, and then they'll be forced to take a left turn in there. All of those are movements, traffic movements, that are not as safe as what we proposed. We were a little bit surprised by the proposal to close that, because as I said, we'd met with staff, particularly with Public Works, and they had no issue with it at all. There was no request at the meeting to add that. None of the comments from the public addressed closing that entrance. And there was just one suggestion from one Planning Commission member at the end of the meeting. So we were a little bit blindsided by it. We think our proposal is the safer of the options that's been presented, and would encourage you to follow your staff recommendation on that and go with the project as originally proposed. If you do take a look at what's been offered as an alternative of the proposals, we have indicated that we'd like to have a double lane down there so that both the bypass traffic as well as the cars that have used the drive-through have their own lane to exit the property. As between the 2 alternatives where there's just going to be a single lane there, we actually prefer what Public Works has suggested more recently, that the exit lane be for the bypass lane rather than for the drive-through lane itself. But we actually firmly believe that our proposal was the best option, and would encourage you to follow staff on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Just a note, there was a significant amount of public comment that raised the issue of pedestrian safety along Cedar Avenue. So I believe Commissioner Kwanzaa's motion was responding to the fact that with 2 curb cuts, you have those 2 points of conflict between people walking along the roadway and cars turning in across a pedestrian corridor on Cedar Avenue. So do you have a suggestion about why the 2 curb cuts on Cedar would be a safer option for pedestrians than the option that eliminates one of those curb cuts to reduce those conflict points?
Sure. I think we need to take an overall look at the site, and I've talked about kind of the car safety and the car traffic issues. We'll have more cars at the 47th. That's obviously going to create more potentially conflict points between pedestrians and cars. But I think we also need to look at the site as a whole. I mean, right now we have 6 lanes of ingress and egress onto the site. And the comp plan simply calls for looking for opportunities to minimize those where possible. And we were going down from 6 to 4. And I think that that was already a significant improvement for the site.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for the applicant? Seeing none, I'll go ahead and invite anyone from the public who would like to come up and speak. And then just please state your name and address for the record. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Aaron Taylor. I live pretty close to this proposed Starbucks, and I think I was here a couple of more times about this same action. I was walking down the street earlier this week, and I think I emailed the photos to Peter as well. I was walking with my family. There was a huge accident right at the proposed spot for this Starbucks, and I can only foresee more accidents happening at this proposed site. I think it's poorly planned. I think it's very capitalistic, and I think it might help the neighborhood, but are we going to take away this small town feeling in this neighborhood, or are we going to continue to gentrify Minneapolis to make it some other city that doesn't work for the residents here in the Lake Nokomis area? This is the accident was very, it wasn't tragic at all, but it did back up Cedar Avenue pretty bad across 46th Street as well, going south. So allow additional curb cuts, I can only see more accidents happening. At this point in time, I don't even walk down the street with my family anymore until the morning time where it's not as busy. But we would like to enjoy our neighborhood a lot more because we think we have a pretty nice neighborhood right now on a very quiet lake, and we would like to keep it that way. I know that the plans have already been approved, but I'm just here to voice my opinion. I hope my opinion is taken into consideration, but since things are already approved, I guess I just want to say that this is going to continue to happen without additional traffic studies for this area as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Would anyone else like to speak on this item? Anyone else? Last call, and then seeing none, I will close the public hearing. I did want to just check with staff one last time. We've heard some kind of pros and cons about the different traffic and pedestrian safety, and just to clarify for the council members what the conversations were with Public Works around the recommended solution here.
So what was the Public Works feedback specifically? Public Works feels that either the originally proposed site plan or the proposed alternative with the 14-foot curb cut at the southern end of the drive aisle are both approvable. They did not elaborate for me on the pros and cons of those two options, and unfortunately I was not present for the original PDR conversation to know, but and I think from a staff perspective, we also have kind of a lot of ambivalence and mixed feelings just generally about a drive-through in this location, but given that it's a allowed use, we are fine with either of those proposals as well. So
Thank you. And those two actions would be either approving or denying the appeal. We don't have to, is the original, you're saying either the original or the condition that the Planning Commission, or is the third? The 14-foot isn't quite what the Planning Commission recommended, is that right?
The Public Works is not in favor of the proposed alternative that the applicant put forward, but they are okay with the originally approved, the originally recommended for approval site plan that staff recommended.
Or the condition that the Planning Commission added?
Yes.
Wonderful. Thank you. Okay, Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm going to go ahead and move that we deny the appeal.
there's a motion, is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, I will just acknowledge that at the Planning Commission and in a lot of the written comments in our packets, we did hear a lot of feedback from the surrounding neighbors that this wasn't, this kind of design with a drive-through here wasn't really the preferred development that the community wanted to see. And I talked a lot with Councilmember Quincy's office, who I know attended community meetings about this. Our regulations don't allow us to deny a drive-through here, and they do allow this kind of commercial use here. And so in other parts of the city, including Councilmember Goodman and I worked on a pedestrian-oriented overlay district that would have added some more restrictions to this kind of area. So I know Councilmember Quincy's office is looking forward to see what kinds of things would be possible to put in place that would guide the development in a different direction on this corridor. And then we also added some conditions that were responsive to other concerns that the neighbors had brought that the applicant was happy to fulfill. So is there any further discussion on this item? Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do want to acknowledge the gentleman from the neighborhood that spoke and say that I appreciate you being here and all the other neighbors that came out as well to the Planning Commission meeting. And this is across the street from Ward 12. I disagree with the applicants that this having only one curb cut on Cedar actually makes for more pedestrian conflicts and makes it less safe. I actually think that what the Planning Commission did ultimately makes it safer overall within the neighborhood for pedestrians and has some other benefits as well for traffic safety. It's not exactly the safest area and intersection down there, as those of us who are frequently there can attest to.
Wonderful. Any further discussion? Seeing none. All those in approval of Councilmember Johnson's motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? That carries. Thank you. So item number 2 is a appeal of a variance and subdivision at 3006 West 40th Street, and we will again begin with staff. How many people would like to speak on this item? Okay, thank you.
Good morning. My name is Janelle Woodmeyer, Senior City Planner with the Community Planning and Economic Development Department. The property that will be discussed today is located at 3006 West 40th Street. What the Planning Commission considered was a proposal to split a lot that required 2 variances in a subdivision, and their decision to approve those to allow the lot split has been appealed, and those are not by the original applicants. So again, the proposal would be to split the subject property. As part of that, they'd be demolishing the existing structure in order to construct then 2 new single-family homes, one on each new lot. The zoning for this property is R1, and in the R1 district, the minimum lot size requirement is 6,000 square feet per lot with a minimum lot width requirement of 50 feet. The proposed lots would be 39.2 feet wide each, and then each corresponding lot size would be 4,900 square feet and 4,897 square feet. So these are both below the minimum requirements. So those are the 2 variances requested, one for lot width and one for lot area. And then the minor subdivision application was needed because the proposed lot line wouldn't be aligning with an underlying platted lot line. Staff recommended approval of these applications, and the Planning Commission unanimously adopted the recommendation. So here you can see, just going back to their proposal, the existing structure that would be removed, and then where they want to locate that new lot line to create the 2 new lots. So factors that were considered in these applications are: 1, this is predominantly a single-family area. This site is also located in an addition called Cottage City Addition, and the original platting for this addition is primarily consisting of smaller platted lots that are about 25 feet in width. So here's an example, a subset of that area, that addition, that includes the subject property where you can see the underlying platting. And again, mostly 25-foot wide lots make up the original platting. And this resulted in quite a variety of lot sizes in this area. So looking around this property within 350 feet, in doing an analysis, 41% of the lots are less than 6,000 square feet in area, and 30% of the lots are less than 50 feet in area. So this is reflecting that variety that I noted. And so again, looking back at the proposal here, the subject property consists of these multiple platted lots, and they are proposing to divide this into 2 lots of just about equal size. Both of these lots would have alley access, so the proposed lots don't need to have driveways to the street. And with the existing lot area, you could actually build quite a large house, but that's out of character with Character's area, which is mostly moderately sized houses. The proposed lots are also pretty close in size to a standard residential lot size of about 5,000 square feet. And so we didn't identify any issues why they couldn't be developed at this size without need for additional variances. And again, the minor subdivision was just needed because it's not aligning with the underlying platted lot lines, and that's in order to create 2 pretty equal sized lots. So we didn't identify any issues for redeveloping the site for 2 new single-family homes. The Planning Commission reiterated some of these findings, but also in their discussion, they noted that this proposal would be in the interest of expanding housing opportunities in the city. And although they didn't add any conditions of approval to the variances, they did encourage the applicant to design the proposal to minimize some impervious surfaces, make sure that their stormwater management or stormwater is managed on site. And that was in response to some of the testimony from the public hearing. So that concludes my presentation. I can take any questions.
Are there any questions from staff? For staff? Seeing none, let's go ahead and begin with anyone who'd like to speak. Please state your name and address for the record, and we will use the timer that Councilmember Johnson will control here. Thank you.
So that means I have 2 minutes?
We can give the first, are you the appellant, the folks that appealed the decision of the Planning Commission?
My name is Joseph Uhas. We live at 3940 Washburn Avenue South, so we live just adjacent to that property to the east. Our house sits a little bit above that property that's sitting there. So first off, you stand here and you feel like we're on trial because we're trying to block an appeal. So I wore my striped shirt to show you that we feel like we're on trial here and we're very uncomfortable about being put in this position. We didn't bring this upon ourselves. This has been cast upon us to try to protect what we currently have. So let me introduce my wife is Karen Mayer. I'm Joseph Uhas. Karen works, just for you to understand our character, we're not the 1%ers. We're working families. Karen runs the Women, Infants, and Children's program for Hennepin County. So she's worried about bringing up babies that are before they're born and making sure that they're healthy. Me, I've been a safety professional for the last 37 years. So after parents raise them and they get out into the workforce, I feel like it's my responsibility to take care of those people. So that's kind of our character. We're about taking care of things. So, and let me tell you what we're for. We're for continued development. We're not trying to block this because we're not about development. We're for continued development. We're for increased values within the neighborhood. We're not here to block this because we think it is bad just for us. We think it's bad for the neighborhood. When you start making special deals, and I do think this is a Kelm-Hellman kind of special deal, when you split a lot and you give these builders, architects, and investors a license to make all kinds of money in a very desirable neighborhood, I think that really butts up against taking care of the people that are currently in those positions. I do consider this much more than just a lot division and 2 variances. I think this is about splitting a lot, and it's actually 4 variances. You've got variances for each one of those properties. So we should be talking about these independently, not as one. They should have to present this as, now we've got a subdivision, which I think we totally oppose, and then we should be talking about variances for each one of those properties. So this whole thing should be set back and pushed through again. So I asked the question of staff in this as we were trying to prepare for this. So I said, so how good of a deal is this? How frequently for the last year have you asked for a 20% variance and approved a 20% variance? So we're talking about from 50 to 40, and from, what is it, 5,000 or 6,000 to less than 5,000. Each one of those is a 20% variance over the norm. That's an outstanding reach for the city to say, this is just, we can just postage stamp that and say that that's good. So my question to staff was, could you tell me how often you do this, how frequently it happens? Who do you do this for? Do you have a record that shows me you've done this for this builder, this developer, this architect? Can you show me where the standard has been set and this is an acceptable practice within the city? And the answer I got was, go look on the website, do the analysis yourself. I thought that was a very inappropriate answer. And I think it reflects back on the city. Either you don't have the information and shame on you for not having the information, or you have the information and you aren't willing to share it. And I consider that really an issue as well. If you aren't tracking this information, how can you say 20% variance from a lot width is acceptable? You have nothing to stand by. So then I think then again, it becomes a special deal for these guys to make a large profit over a lot width that fits within current zoning. And
so in the remaining time, I think perhaps a focus on the impacts of the subdivision would be
But I'd
helpful,
like to also talk
rather
about
than focusing on accusations to staff and council members.
I'd also like to talk about what I have tried to do to get rid of this whole thing. We've reached out, as soon as the last meeting was over, reached out to the architect and said, so what are your plans? Make us feel comfortable with what you're going to do. What are your plans? How many more variances are you going to need to do this? And the answer we got was, we don't have plans, we can't do it. So I reached out to them again this week. I said, make me feel comfortable again. Show me schematics. We're at this phase that they're ready to tear the house down. Show me schematics and show me what you're going to do for this property. Make me feel comfortable for this meeting. I got nothing. So then I reached out again and I said, so I got no response. So make me feel comfortable. And we didn't see it here on their presentation either. What are you going to do with these properties so you're not going to impact the neighbors? And then we've also, just this week, again, to get rid of this whole issue, I put an offer on the table to purchase 15 feet of the property behind my house. I said, we don't have any of the details worked out on that, but I made an offer and I've gotten no response to that. So again, they would still have 68 feet of width of property, plus still a large lot. It would give us our buffer zone that we're looking for. And it would also, again, provide them with a substantial property to build a house that we feel would fit within the neighborhood. So I'm reaching out and I'm trying to find out what is good for the neighbors. And this is what it does. It really does eliminate all the reasons for variances. So I think before you can make a decision on this, I think there's a lot of stuff in play here that needs to be analyzed. And I think you really need to ask staff, give me the analysis to show me why, within a very desirable neighborhood, we should be writing checks to developers and giving them a whole lot to start developing.
Okay, thank you. Do you have any final comments? Thank you.
This is our attorney, Matt Murphy, who's going to speak, and then I'll speak a little bit.
Good morning, Madam Chair, council members. I think, obviously the appellants have some very strong feelings about the development that's going on, and they can attest to what the feeling and the character and what this will do to the neighborhood and their view of that. I think from my perspective, what I'll focus on is the record that was developed here to approve this decision. I think our the appeal notification that we submitted to the city addresses many of the factors that I think are at issue here today. One of the main factors I think that warrants a little bit more discussion in this regard is a discussion of the unique soil conditions that are involved in this neighborhood. This neighborhood was at one time a backwater to Lake Calhoun. There are some unique soil conditions requiring many of the houses in this area to be put on pilings to provide the adequate foundational support. And as was illustrated, my client's property sits in a slightly higher elevation than the property in question here. And the concern, of course, is settling, subsiding of the foundational supports and the impact that may or may not have on their foundation pilings. The problem is the record just doesn't have that information in it right now. We don't know what would happen. There's been no geotech work done. There's been no seismic work done to figure out whether or not the disturbance in this property would impact that. And that I think that is a major consideration that this commission or the council needs to consider before they approve things like this. This project is unique. I understand the city has done other variants of this kind, the same nature and things like that. This property, the property adjacent to my client's property, is unique in the regard that the soil conditions make it unique. And that has to be looked at in further detail. Of course, the issue here is, your ordinance does provide for that. It's during the permitting stage. We think, during an excavation, consideration of an excavation permit, there has to be this consideration of seismic and geotech issues with regard to the property being developed. I think that needs to be looked at before those decisions are made, because once you grant the variances, once you grant the minor subdivision, that's already been cast, and the project is going to go forward, and the conditions need to be looked at. If the council or this commission is considering that, we would also ask in the alternative that conditions be attached to this approval to make these geotech review, it has to be looked at before they move forward with any development, because we just don't know if excavating this site will cause any problems. The property adjacent to it, the house was built on a much larger lot than average, according to what the city staff has presented to you. There might be a reason why the house is built where it is. There might be a reason why the whole lot wasn't used for the house. The problem is, it just isn't anything in the record that goes to that very issue. So I think from my client's perspective, to make themselves comfortable, we would need to have conditions attached to this, or at the very least back up and review what the decision was that was made. So that's I think the record in this regard just doesn't have that information. And my client's concerns could be addressed if conditions were attached, or if we backed up and said, yeah, maybe we need to look at this a little deeper. So I appreciate it. I will answer any questions that you have.
Okay. Any questions? Seeing none, move along.
Hello, my name is Karen Mayer. I'm Joe Yoss's wife. I live at that address also, the one that's adjacent to this property. I'm going to talk a little bit more about the major concerns that we have regarding this minor subdivision and two variances. First of all, at the last meeting, this meeting, staff stated that basically, of course you're going to do this minor subdivision because it was originally plotted like that. Well, that original plot was done over 100 years ago, you guys, when small cottages were put on there. And cottages, if you can recall, are like little 2-bedroom cottages, not a 2,500 square foot home, 2 homes that they're proposing. So to go back to what the original plotting, as your staff have said that, of course, we're going to do this, doesn't make sense. When it was zoned to R1, that should be all in the past. It would be like saying, oh, well, we can't do curbs or paved roads or cables anymore for electricity because that wasn't in the original plan 100 years ago. So I think that should be totally taken off the table. Allowing this lot to be split, basically the setback requirement is 5 feet from the home to the property line. We have about 3 feet 6 inches. Our house was built in 1950. So we're the second owners. We had nothing to do with that. That was allowed. But Joe, would you come up here? I want to show you what 8.5 feet look like. This is 8.5 feet. That end and this end. There will be a house there, and there will be a house here. That's a house. This is our house. That is not even the 10 feet that is required. And I've done the math. You can easily do the math based on the 2,500 square feet that they're suggesting. And I know, and you know, that they will have to get up to that 5 feet requirement to get 2,500 two houses on that lot. The also thing the staff said that she kept referring to that, well, the standard size is 5,000 feet. Zone R1 is 6,000 square feet. She suggested that there was a variety of plot sizes. Actually, they're not. If you look at that map, there are not that many sizes. And these two plots will be the second and third smallest lots in the area. We're also very concerned with the stability of the land. As our attorney said, and we've consulted with construction engineers, and if you drive in our neighborhood, you know that yards have sunk, that houses have had to rebuild their foundations and hold it up. And it's because this was built on wetlands. Lake Calhoun used to go all the way to 44th. We are on 40th. So the ground is incredibly unstable, it's fluid, and that's movement of soil without any disturbance. They come and do this, they're going to really disturb the property. We also, our house is on pilings. There's 18 inches between our home and the soil. They were out there yesterday doing soil bore testing. The machine was right next to our property line. I'm concerned already that there's damage. They bored in there. They are actually would have to go over our property line to do some of the work that they have to do when you have to build a foundation. So again, we're very, very concerned about, and we know there is going to be damage to our property and our structure of our home. We really believe that, from what we're presenting here, that minor subdivision should be null and void and not held up, and therefore the other two variances should be invalid. However, if these approvals continue, we want you to put conditions on the variances, that an additional setback from our home be put in there so that at least minimally we have 10 feet between our house and their house. That is what should be, I mean, just looking at what I showed you should be there. We should expect zero movement of any of the soils on our property. We want seismic monitoring to be done and set up before any start of construction. We'd like to see the whole engineered soil retention plan before they start any demolition and construction, because demolition by bringing those big machines on the ground property will already start impacting our home. We want to pick a soil engineer firm of our choice, and the owners of that property will pay for all these things. We also want to incur no cost to ourselves for the testing, and we will not incur any damages to our property from the construction at all. As I said, at the Planning Commission, one of the members did suggest that the developers look into some of these things, but there's no requirement that they do. They can take that suggestion and just go away with it. The other points I do want to bring up is that you guys have, the city of Minneapolis has competing initiatives. Through this variance process that we've gone through.
I'm going to ask that we finalize this item as we have a very full agenda. So just a few more seconds here on the final thoughts, and then we'll have to ask staff to respond to the many questions that have been raised through the testimony.
All right. But you do have variant based on your reduce, recycle, livable communities. These new houses don't even have yards where people can play. You're all about activity and healthy living and home gardening. You can't even have a home garden on some of these. You're also very concerned with water quality, as our attorney said, that there is going to be an impact on runoff. So I reviewed with you what our minimum ask is, what we are wanting. If you continue to put our property at risk by moving forward on this, we will take further action. And that's how I'm going to leave it. Do you have any questions?
That's fine. Is there any question for the appellant? There is none. Would anyone else like to speak on this item? Okay. Let's come on up and we'll have the 2-minute timer for each of the additional public speakers.
After him, can I say one more thing then? After he presents?
No.
Okay, we're going to have one more thing to ask you then. So at the end of this meeting, because through this process, we are very surprised at how these meetings go. Are you going to vote on this as a yes? Are you going to put conditions on it? Are you going to push it to another meeting so further investigation can happen? Because the analysis from staff they did not do any further analysis from when we did our original to the appeal. So what will you be doing?
I think part of the issue is that this is simply a subdivision request. It is not an approval of the new buildings that would go here, which is a separate process. So once we get done with the public hearing, I'll be able to ask staff to clarify and respond to the many questions that were raised about the new buildings and soil conditions and construction, which is very common questions about all new construction in the neighborhood. But I do want to make sure that the other folks have a chance to speak. The Zoning and Planning Committee is the committee where appeals are held and public hearings are held after the Planning Commission appeal comes through. The final vote will happen at the City Council meeting this cycle. And that is the final decision of the City of Minneapolis. So
you're not going to vote on it today?
we vote on it as a committee
But
today,
then
yes.
it goes to the City Council?
That's correct. And staff is here to answer any of these kind of clarifying questions. We have the next two speakers come on up, and then we do have the final two items on our agenda after this, including a very long public hearing I'm expecting next.
Hello, my name is Constance Pepin, 4031 Zenith Avenue South, and I'm told that I can speak to this appeal without affecting the original reason I came to the meeting, which is for item number 3 on the agenda. I want to say I'm very sorry that I didn't know in advance about this item on the agenda, or I would have prepared more. I just felt I had to come up and support the appeal because so much of this is happening in our neighborhood. I couldn't believe to hear this and that it wasn't better known in the neighborhood. And a couple of points that were made about protecting existing properties. This is happening all over the neighborhood. Linden Hills was really a big water land at one time. The soils are very unstable. The water level, all the time it happens that when they finally get down to excavating, there's flooding, there's damage to adjacent properties. The stormwater is not properly managed. And it's not just a question of managing construction. It's really please stop allowing developers and putting developers in charge of what's happening in our neighborhood. The environmental impacts are maybe not clear now, but they will be very soon. The loss of trees, all the trees that come down to build these monster houses with minimal setbacks. And I'd like to say that unfortunately, the way it's set up is the developer will come back and ask for minimum setbacks and a variance for even fewer setbacks. I hate to say this, but maybe there won't even be the 8.5 feet that they measured out. That's how bad it has gotten to be, where all these variances get approved. The loss of trees, the hydrology in the area, the environmental impacts that no one is even talking about, or some people are talking about them, but the city's not listening. And I really urge you to grant this appeal and make the developer think twice about the damage that they are doing and listen. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Pepin. Final speaker? Welcome. Please state your name and address for the record.
My name is Chris Strom. I'm the architect, and I'm with Nick Smaby, the builder, and Golem Kian, the owner's rep. So I'll keep it brief. I want to thank you, the council, for the opportunity to tell you a little bit more about our project. Just a little context. I lived in Cottage City for 9 years. I currently live in Fulton. Nick, the builder, he is president of Choice Wood Company. Nick grew up a few blocks from here. He went to Southwest High School. Choice Wood was National Builder of the Year in 2006. Their work is featured in the Not So Big House. I happen to, part of my business is to specialize in small accessory dwelling units. We very much care about the neighborhood, and in fact, we think it's a really, really good thing for the neighborhood. Just speaking to the geotech question about the soil, the geotech soil test was done yesterday, and we're obviously going to build appropriately for the soil conditions. We're seeking to subdivide the property at 3006 West 40th Street. It is just under 10,000 square feet. We received unanimous approval from the Planning Commission on February 6th, and frankly, we were pretty surprised that this approval would be appealed. So it's located in Cottage City. It was already said that it was platted with unusually small lot sizes, and the intention back in the day was to entice middle-class families to be able to live by Lake Calhoun. The highlighted lots on this map are all narrower than 40 feet wide, and it's pretty clear to us that our two lots would fit right into the neighborhood as shown in the darker orange. A very similar proposal was approved in 2015 on nearby Thomas Avenue. Their lot is a little smaller than ours, but they were granted permission for the split. There's now a single-family house on what is now 3933 Thomas and another single-family house at what is 3935 Thomas. Another proposal was approved in 2015 on Vincent Avenue. There's now a single-family house at what is now 3905 Vincent and another single-family house at 3907. So we think this proposal is good for the neighborhood. And I think we can agree that smaller houses are preferable to monster houses. The Linden Hills Neighborhood Council also thought our proposal was good for the neighborhood and wrote us a letter of support, which is not necessarily common for Linden Hills. We heard a lot from Mr. Uhas and Ms. Mayer about the effect on the neighborhood, but I think most of their comments really were about the effect on their particular property. And one of the reasons that the potential houses are going to be close is because their own house is non-conforming and is over the setback on their property. This is the property survey. Their property is the one to the right in the yellow area, and the white area represents our property. And we kind of need to address the elephant in the room, in that the red area is a retaining wall that Mr. Uhas and Ms. Mayer built at least 3 feet into our property, and that exists. They also built a deck over the property line by 1 foot. And the reason we bring this up is it's just hard to take an appeal seriously about respecting property lines, because this is really about a lot subdivision and not what we're actually going to build there, because they already have elements of their own property that are non-conforming. So with that, I'll take any questions you might have.
Are there any questions for the applicant? There are none. Would anyone else like to speak who hasn't spoken? Ms. Romanishin, we have quite a long meeting here, so hopefully be brief.
Sarah Lynn Romanishin, the Wedge neighborhood. I didn't plan on testifying on this item, but I do believe it to be necessary. I also, just as a note, I also wish that the agenda had been posted earlier. Some of this was...
The clerk's office has a new rule of posting agendas 24 hours in advance of all meetings.
Thank you. Actually, that's good to know. I support the appeal by Karen Meyer and Joseph Uhas. The frustration is very real in the residents of this city, and as that is seen by their testimony. It is time to listen to our residents and address real livability and environmental issues that are happening. Please support the appeal, and just as a note, the small houses that this gentleman was referring to were originally meant to be cabins or summer homes. They were not meant to be middle-class year-round homes. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak who hasn't spoken? Anyone else? Last call. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. In order to keep going, we gave significantly more time to both the appellants and the folks who came to speak. So I just want to have staff clarify some of the questions. We did see the surrounding maps. There are 31 properties in the staff report that are shown to be under the 6,000 square feet. Maybe Ms. Weidmeyer, you could put that up from the staff report, as well as answer the questions about the approval process for the new buildings, including any variances that those would need from the new regulations that this council approved around R1 homes, as well as the soil conditions and some of the questions that were raised about the construction impacts, which again, I know are very common concerns with all of the construction happening in this neighborhood.
Oh yeah, so here's the diagrams showing the lot sizes within 350 feet of the site. So it's not showing or reflecting the lot widths, but that was, 30% of these properties are also only or less than 50 feet in width, and then 41% are less than 6,000 square feet in area. Looking at the zoning code reviews requirements that they'll be subject to, of course, will be they'll have a maximum impervious surface requirement. They'll have setback requirements. They'll have to adhere to those. If they don't, a variance would be needed, but they'd have to demonstrate that they can meet all three findings to grant those variances. And at this time, we haven't identified that there would be any need for variances. Looking at the construction process, there are things in place to address impacts to surrounding properties. In order to, in addition to like meeting the zoning code requirements, they also have to meet building code requirements, which would address soil conditions, making sure that they're constructing the new building for those soil conditions, but they'd also have to enter into a construction agreement. And part of that is addressing impacts to adjacent properties. So that is actually required. They have to submit a signed document addressing how they're going to meet all the standards that have been established before they can get that building permit. Is there anything I missed?
Are there any further questions for staff? And then Mr. Wittenberg had a...
Chair Bender, committee members, just to follow up on a couple of things that Ms. Whitmire noted. She referenced the construction management agreement, which covers a wide range of issues, and it would address both the demolition and new construction, specifically to address the sort of geotechnical related issues. There are more specific standards now in place than there had been several years ago about retaining a separation between a basement and the water table. The city is much more careful about that now, as well as during the construction process. When the excavation takes place, there is much more substantial shoring required to ensure stabilization of the property when it has been excavated, and you don't have sort of collapsing walls adjacent to other properties.
Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm glad you have this map up. I don't think it shows overwhelmingly that there are smaller lots. It shows that it's about half and half. And if you go out about one more block, you can see there's more bigger lots than smaller lots. So I'm interested in your analysis with regard to the hardship or practical difficulty. I think it's a stretch to suggest that something that was platted 100 years ago creates a practical difficulty. They can build one house on that lot. Therefore, there is an alternative. So I'm confused. This is just a question of density. Do we either want more density or we don't? And so I'm interested in how we strictly define this issue of practical difficulty. They can build something on that lot, and it will be bigger. They'll be able to build whatever they can on a lot of that size. But if they're going to subdivide the lot, you're going to have two large houses, not two small cottages as plotted 100 years ago, right? So how is your analysis with regard to practical difficulty anything other than economic?
Chair Bender, Councilmember Goodman, that was part of the analysis, the existing underlying platting lots, and they do create a variety of sizes, but also just looking at the lot size that exists there currently, you can build a much larger house, which would be a large house would be very out of character for this area. So that was another consideration.
Ms. Hilling, aren't two large houses out of character for the neighborhood? I mean, essentially what you're saying is one large house would be out of character, but two 2,500 square foot houses would be out of character also. So it's just an economic question, right?
I'll just note that number was not given by the applicant. That was a number given by the appellant. So we don't have a proposal in front of us for homes. Is that correct?
That's correct. We don't have any development plans in front of us. So they're just subject to what is allowed by the zoning ordinance.
So what would be allowed under the code is a house up to 2,500 square feet, correct?
That's correct.
I would love to hear the applicants tell us what size home they're suggesting, given that they're allowed to have 2,500 square feet. And since they're here, maybe they can comment on that.
Does staff have information, or would we like to hear from the applicant? That's fine.
I can guarantee it's not going to be 1,200 square feet. So, I mean, it's either one big house or two big houses. So how does it become anything other than economic? If your argument is this was platted for all these small lots, therefore that's the practical difficulty, then how does it become anything other than economic, one big house, two big houses? Great. If the chair will allow, sorry.
So why don't we have the applicant come up and answer that question? Perhaps Mr. Wittenberg could also remind us, what are the rules that we adopted that Councilmember Palmisano authored to sort of control for the size of buildings as well.
Thanks. Just to clarify, so it's pretty subjective what a large or small house is. We could, if without subdividing the lot, we could build a house that is about 62 feet wide, which is grossly out of context with the area and really we're not really interested in doing. If we do subdivide the lot, by code, the largest we can build over 2 floors is 2,500 square feet. That means it's a maximum 1,250 square foot footprint. I lived in a small cottage in Cottage City, and we had a 840 square foot footprint, and it's not giant, and 1,250 is really not, I wouldn't consider it a big house at all. So that's the largest that can be built as a footprint on this property.
But as a total amount of FAR, you could build 2,500 square feet. Are you arguing that that's not a large house?
Not in today's context. No, I'm not. No.
Okay, well, that's...
It's about average for new home construction.
Okay, are there any further questions for staff?
I'm sorry. We're done with that piece of it. I have another
Councilmember
question for
Goodman.
staff. Mr. Wittenberg, so you stated that before a building permit, or Ms. Holeen suggested that before a building permit is issued, there's a signed document to assure that there aren't going to be any construction defects or damages. Yet it's been my experience in my ward that once they get the building permit, all sorts of damage occurs, and then we call it a private cause of action between 2 property owners. And I can give you a dozen examples in my ward of houses built right in my own neighborhood in Bryn Mawr where they get the building permit and then there are cracks in the houses next door, soft soils. We could talk about Vincent's, Washburn, and such. So what kind of assurances do these folks have other than a private cause of action that our issuing a building permit won't result in any damage? I mean, that doesn't sound like any reassurance at all. It just sounds like we're going to have 2 lawyers fighting it out later if they can afford it.
Chair Bender, Councilmember Goodman, the construction management agreement addresses a wide range of construction management issues. It doesn't assure an adjacent property owner that there won't be damage during construction. We simply can't do that. There are a variety of measures that have been taken to minimize the potential for that kind of damage, such as the increased shoring requirements. And from my experience, it's been quite rare that, especially since the construction management agreement has gone in place, that construction has negatively affected adjacent properties directly through some sort of damage. You're correct that if damage does take place, that is largely a private matter between those 2 property owners.
Okay, well, thank you. I just don't want to leave out there the idea that this construction management agreement, which Councilmember Palmisano so ably made happen, gives any protection at all for any damage from a house that's being built within 8 feet, 4 feet, or 12 feet from any other house, because it doesn't. And our own inspectors are very limited in terms of what they can do when someone does see damage. I've been through the process with inspections many times in my own neighborhood.
Okay. Is there any further questions for staff? Is there a motion? Is there a motion on this item? Councilmember Goodman's moved to deny it.
Sure, I'm going to move to grant the appeal. I don't think I'm going to win this one, but I guess I'll make this argument. I don't think a practical difficulty has been established. It's pretty simple. That's the standard, is practical difficulty. And I think they can buy this lot and build a house, and therefore there's no practical difficulty problem. This is a question about density. Let's just admit that's what it's about. In a very nice neighborhood, more people want to live there, and this isn't like building affordable housing. We're not putting up 2 1,200 square foot houses. We're talking about 2 2,400 square foot houses, and the neighborhood association, the planning commission, and the council members perhaps want to side on the side of density, and that is a legitimate place to be. But I look at whether or not there's a practical difficulty, and I don't see a practical difficulty to building one house on one lot. Therefore, I'm moving to grant the appeal.
Mr. Nielsen, did you have a clarification about staff's finding?
I did, Chair Bender and Councilmember Goodman, just on the motion, the standard for a variance is not that they can't build anything or that there is an alternative. Some would argue that a very large house area isn't a reasonable alternative, but that there is an alternative. That is not the standard. That was the standard under the change in law several years ago that we dealt with in the variance standards, and the current law does not state that. The fact that there is an alternative does not preclude the variance request. The standard is simply is what they request reasonable at this point? And again, the new construction is not an issue. We're not talking about particular construction here. It's whether there are unique circumstances, is the request reasonable, and then the compatibility and contextual analysis with the essential character of the locality. And so we have a almost 10,000 square foot lot with comprised of 4 smaller platted lots. And so that should form the basis for your analysis, not necessarily the new construction and the potential for damage with the new construction, which would all be addressed on a subsequent phase of analysis.
Thank you, Mr. Nielsen. Is there any discussion on the motion? And I'll just note that the Planning Commission discussion really relied a lot on the context here, and that, you know, this is a situation where you would end up with either smaller lots that are, you know, smaller than the other surrounding smaller lots, or one of the biggest lots in the neighborhood. And so the Planning Commission discussed at length, after a lengthy public hearing, the sort of pros and cons of that. And I don't know that anyone felt sort of activist about density in Linden Hills. You're talking about 1 or 2 single family homes. But we did note the neighborhood organization support and having conversations with the 13th Ward office that the neighborhood is split on whether or not 2 families or 1 family should have the opportunity to live in a very desirable neighborhood. So again, I don't think it was sort of an activist statement from the Planning Commission, rather just a weighing of the legal context and the recommendation of our staff. I'd also note that I don't particularly appreciate people making ethical accusations to our very hardworking staff that spend their evenings at these meetings. And if you do have an ethical concern or complaint, we have a process you could talk to our city attorney or clerk about. But that's a very serious accusation. You know, corruption or ethical standard breaking. And so I would encourage people not to sort of throw that around. And if you do have an ethical concern or complaint, that we have a process to make complaints against staff or council members. Is there any further discussion? Goodman.
I didn't make any ethical complaint against anyone, so I hope that wasn't directed
part
at
of
me.
the public hearings.
Oh, okay.
Significant testimony in the public hearing.
Okay. I'm just feeling like you were responding to something that I said. I think equal people can disagree that either 1 house or 2 houses would be okay here. But it seems like this is a question of money, not a question of problem with building 1 house on 1 lot. I think people can have a difference of opinion with regard to the situation. I'm not bemoaning anyone. No one made the motion to do it in the other direction. So I made a motion, and if folks don't like it, which it sounds like they don't, they'll vote it down. No one made a motion to deny the appeal.
Absolutely. Any further discussion on the motion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Nay. Okay, that motion fails. Would anyone make the alternative motion? Councilmember Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will move then to make sure I got the motion in front of me here. I will move to deny the appeal.
All right. Is there any discussion on Councilmember Johnson's motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. That motion carries. And then we are finished with item number 2. Thank you for coming. And if you have any process questions, the clerk again or the city attorney and staff can answer any of the appeal procedural questions that you might have. And I know Ms. Widmeyer, thank you for being so responsive to so many questions. Item number 3 is an appeal of the demolition of an historic resource at 2620 West 44th Street. Thank you for everyone who stayed through the previous public hearings and for your patience in our committee meeting today. We're going to make sure that everyone has a chance to speak for this item as well. And then we do have the final item for discussion, which is item number 6. So we're going to try to move along so that our council colleagues can stay through those as well.
All right.
Welcome, Mr. Hanauer.
Thank you, Chair Bender and council members. The demolition of historic resource application for the Brenda Euland residence at 2620 West 44th Street in Linden Hills. CPED did recommend that the HPC deny the demolition permit for the residence and to direct the planning director to prepare or cause to prepare a designation study. The HPC upheld that recommendation 6-1, and the applicants, Mr. John Gross and Andrew Commerce, did appeal that denial of the demolition permit. Subject property is just west of Lake Harriet, modest 2-story home on the north side of West 44th Street. And just a quick review of the ordinance that helps outlay how you do the findings is the review is that you have 3 options. One is if the committee determines the property is not a historic resource, then the committee can approve the demolition permit. And 2, if the committee does determine that the property is a historic resource, the committee shall deny the demolition permit and direct the plan director to prepare or cause to prepare the designation study. And that third option is even if you do see this as a historic resource, but that the applicant does make the findings that there are no reasonable alternatives, then you can also approve the demolition of the historic resource. And I bring that up to sum up the applicant's reason for appeal. They bring up 2 reasons, and I hope to sum it up accurately, in that they do not contest that Brenda Uland was a significant person. It was that this residence is not historically significant. And even if you do find this property historically significant, they state, and they have more additional information in your packets, that there's no reasonable alternatives to demolition. So, as mentioned, subject property is, staff made the recommendation that was significant based on criterion 2, properties associated with the life of a significant person, and this being Brenda Uland for her contributions to the literary field. It's worth noting that the Linden Hills Small Area Plan did note that this was a potential historic resource within the 2013 Small Area Plan. Quick summary of Brenda Uland. Born in 1891, raised in Minneapolis around 1909, heads to New York for college, 1913, graduates. After that, she moves back to Minneapolis for about a year and is an early female reporter for the Minneapolis Tribune and the St. Paul Daily Times. Just a short time after that, in 1915, moves back to New York, where she continues her writing career. It's an impressive array of publications that she's wrote for: Harper's, Collier's, Ladies' Home Journal, and general interest magazines like Saturday Evening Post and Liberty, where she was likely the first female reporter. In this time, she married, had a daughter, and divorced. And it's worth noting her husband, this was in her memoir, but second source, that her husband was notably unsuccessful in his business ventures, leaving Brenda to support herself and her daughter through freelance writing, this being the 19-teens and 20s. By 1930, she, with the Great Depression, aging father, and strong family connection, she moves back to Minneapolis, lived at her childhood home, 3830 West Lake Helen Parkway, or also often known as 3850 Richfield Road, until 1947. And she wrote her two most popular, well-known pieces. 1938 was the book If You Want to Write, sold over 300,000 copies to date, and 1939, her memoir, Me, both published by Putnam. 1941 to 1948, she's a columnist for the Minneapolis Daily Times, and 1946 awarded the Knights of St. Olaf Medal by the Norwegian government for coverage of the Quisling trial in Norway. This property, it was demolished in 1953. Ms. Brenda Uland moved to the subject property in 1954, and at the age of 63, and she lived there until she was 93 when she passed away in 1985. She continued her literary work, writing for 2 smaller publications. She wrote a book that was published by a local publisher, Metropolis, and the North High Band. Wrote essays that were later published in collections of her writings, and wrote a biography of her mother that was published posthumously. She organized her work, and she just continued to write and do work in the literary field, and continuing to organize her work. And stated in the Star Tribune interview in 1983, what I'm trying to do now is put together my collected work and get it decently typed up so it won't be thrown in the posthumous ash can. And thanks to this work, there is a large collection of her writings at the Minnesota Historical Society. So also just mention that she was also a mentor and a lot of that took place at this residence with Patricia Hempel, Karen Weiniger, Bruce Carlson, and Eric Utney. I'll just point out a quote from one of the mentors or mentees that she had, and that was George Sheehan, who is a New York Times bestselling author in writing, stating that one of the joys of my life was receiving letters from Brenda Uland. When she died, I lost more than a good friend. I lost a mentor who inspired me to do my best. During the last 10 years of her life, Brenda sent messages that saw me through the bad days writers always have. So we definitely realize that Brenda Ullin is not a household name citywide, but that there are contributions that she did make in her literary career over 70 years, and some of those did take place at this residence. Prolific writer, had 4 books published, high praise for the books that she did write, and I'm almost done here, but the great American poet Carl Sandburg said that the book, if you want to write, that was the best book on writing ever written at that time. Her memoir by Alice Kaplan she said it was a pioneering book, that one of the first in an autobiographical tradition that gives value to everyday experience. And just noted in Minneapolis St. Paul Magazine, 2003, that she was one of the top 10 local authors. So also, it's seen in our research that she was well ahead of her time. Patricia Hempel said she was a rule-breaking woman, someone that rode her charger against an essential Victorian barricade. And just the accomplishments that she made at the time are impressive. When looking at evaluating a property for association with a significant person, we look to the National Register Bulletin. 3-step process. You determine whether the importance of the individual associated with the property. We feel like that has been made. I don't think the applicant or the appellant would argue that she was an important person for her contributions. For step 2, it's determining whether the property is significant based on the length and nature of the individual's relationship to the property. Ideally, we want that property that's historically significant to be the one that she did her most important work. And that property is no longer, it's demolished. So then the National Register goes on to provide guidance that some properties might be eligible as the only surviving property associated with a significant individual, or that represent the culmination of an important career. And it also states in this bulletin that such a property might include a person's last home, even if most or all of her significant accomplishments occurred before she lived in the house. So, like I said, undoubtedly that house that was just south of Lake Calhoun was her most important home, but there is enough there that we feel that she did contribute to the literary field while living here that warrants a look at a designation study. I'll just, Brenda Ullin in some of her writings, here's one of her quotes saying, it's kind of an old bum house, talking about 2620 West 44th Street, but I could afford it. And so she realized it was not a grand home. But a number of our landmarks in Minneapolis are not those grand homes, including the Lena Smith House and the cottages in Linden Hills. And finally, the third step is to assess the historic integrity of the home. Staff did feel that the property does retain its historic integrity, architectural integrity, and that, once again, there has been few alterations since she lived there. So going back to the ordinance and the 3 options before you for this application is to not see it as a historic resource and allow the demolition, to see it as a historic resource and to commence a designation study, or third, to see if the applicant or the appellant has made the case that there are no reasonable alternatives. And I'll just point to where the arrow is. In determining whether reasonable alternatives exist, the Commission shall consider the significance and integrity of the property, the economic value of the existing structure, including its current use, cost of renovation, and feasible alternative uses. The applicant did provide a lot of financial numbers. They estimate that the overall cost to renovate it and to sell it would be $1.3 million is what it would cost, and there would be a gap of about $800,000 of what they had purchased the property for. And just that they just state that the finances are not there to make it work. And we definitely do realize that the land to home value is well out of proportion, the land being 3 times the valuation of the home currently. And in part, it is because the property is zoned R4. But we do see that there may be reasonable alternatives to help reduce the gap, and that being a possible accessory dwelling unit or 2 in the back of the lot. So the applicant has made the offer of a mitigation plan, and that being a commemoration of Brenda Ullin, either at the Linden Hills Library or perhaps at Lake Harriet, where she was often associated with. Finally, public comments. There's a lot, and I think over 50, both for and against the demolition. You had some passionate and eloquent letters stating what Brenda Eula meant to them, but then you also had a number of letters in support of the demolition of the property and a testimonial to the developers in the work that they've done around here. So I just wanted to sum that up.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for staff before we open the public hearing? Okay, I don't see any. Thank you for the presentation, Mr. Hanauer. We'll go ahead and open the public hearing. So I know we have a lot of people signed in and maybe others who would like to speak. I think for this one, maybe it makes sense to start with the applicant and just kind of go through. I know there's been a lot of discussion back and forth, and maybe we'll kind of end there as well in case there's anything that you need to respond to from the testimony.
That would be great. Thank you. Committee members, I'm Carol Lansing. I'm an attorney at Faegre Baker Daniels. I'm representing the property owners, John Gross and Andrew Comers. Also today with our team is Megan Elliott of Preservation Design Works. In these debates, a lot of the discussion is about whether the person who lived in a building was significant, or an organization that used the building was significant, or the architect. And those stories are intriguing and compelling and more interesting than the other factors that you must consider. We're here today to talk about those other factors. Whatever reactions you have to the story of Brenda Eula, we believe that the City Council is compelled in this case to approve demolition of the building because there are no other reasonable alternatives. In determining whether reasonable alternatives exist, the Council shall consider three factors: the significance of the property, the integrity of the property, and the economic value or usefulness of the existing structure, including its current use, costs of renovation, and feasible alternative uses. With respect to significance, often there is a case that can be made, but that doesn't mean you have to therefore designate or preserve a building. You need to look at the relative significance, and in this case we believe it's low because it's not associated with the works that Brenda Eula is most known for, and doesn't represent her legacy. Preservation of a private home will do nothing to enhance or perpetuate her legacy. Megan Elliott will speak further to the purpose of historic preservation in commemorating and recognizing significant people. With respect to the integrity of the house, integrity means its ability to convey the significance of Brenda Eula through the presence and condition of its physical materials and status. In this case, that integrity is greatly diminished because the interior of the house has been gutted. We understand that neighbors have concerns and emotions around redevelopment, and some of the communications you've had have been about what's coming next. We think it is relevant to your consideration of economic value usefulness of this property to recognize that it has been zoned R4 for a long time. It's in an area of R4 zoning, and so both the market value and the land use planning value of this property is not as a single family home. And with respect to what comes next, neighbors and the city will have the opportunity to participate and review that through the normal processes at Planning Commission. John and Andrew will speak further to the severe economic hardship that preservation of this house will cause them and the lack of any reasonable economic uses of the property. Many have been suggested, but none of them are reasonable. We recognize and respect the passionate testimony that you will hear today about Brenda Eula. At the end, however, we hope that you will conclude that preservation of this house does not preserve her legacy and that there is no reasonable alternative to demolition. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Megan Elliott, and I am representing PDN, also known as Preservation Design Works. Some of you know what we do at PDN. Some of you have had the opportunity to work with on projects in Minneapolis, historic preservation projects, and I think some transformative ones like the Hollywood Theater, C.A. Smith Lumber District, PD Plaza. I think you know that our office is exclusively dedicated to increasing the use and viability of existing historic sites. I built the company about 5 years ago. We have architectural historians, we have social historians, we have historical architects, we have other professionals that just focus on that mission. So that being said, this is a really unusual and frankly unsettling place for me to be. This is not the topic I usually speak to. So you might be wondering, why am I here? Why am I speaking on behalf of this project? And the reason I decided to be here today is because there's two very important factors that influenced me to start a company in preservation and to do the work that we do. The first is that we sincerely believe in the value of heritage. We believe in the value that that brings to a place. We think it should be interpreted, shared, understood, learned from. The second is that we think from a municipal perspective, it's a really important tool for economic development and long-range planning. In this case, we don't think this particular local designation meets either of those goals. I think it's really unfortunate, and this is another goal of mine that we can talk about somewhere else, that we have a very limited toolbox as a city to integrate heritage into our process and culture and understanding. We have one tool, and that's designating a local structure, and that's it. And I think that's actually a problem across the preservation industry in general, is that we don't have a lot of ways that are recognized for integrating cultural heritage. That being said, we all in this room, I think I can say all of us in this room, agree that Brenda Ueland was significant. She is significant. Her work is significant. It had a tremendous impact on Minneapolis. It will continue to impact everyone here and future writers as well. So then designating this local house, in my mind, almost undermines her significance, because it's almost not worthy of representing her work. I think it does lack integrity. I think there have been a lot of changes to the house. The front porch has been modified. There's been a rear addition. The materials have deteriorated. From a local perspective, we don't usually talk about the interior at all. But I've never been to the interior. From what I understand, it's been substantially gutted, and there isn't any representation of where she worked remaining in the house. And as far as association goes, she was a professional writer. She had a tremendous body of work. None of the most influential work, I should say, was created at this house. And that work wasn't about this house. So for the past few months that I've been working with John and Andrew, I can honestly say I've been really impressed with the amount of effort and time and thoughtfulness that they've spent trying to understand Ueland and her work. They put together a number of proposals for increasing access to her work and for interpreting her work. And despite all the limits that we have as a preservation industry and with our ordinance, I think that what they're trying to do really is heritage preservation. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker.
Hi there. I'm John Gross, and this is Andrew Commerce, and we're the appellants. And we'd just like to give a little bit of background really quickly. I know we've got a lot of folks who want to speak behind us, and then go into the economic issue and go over those numbers as quickly as we can. Oh, need glasses to begin. And thank you for letting us speak, committee.
I would encourage you to be brief on those items, just to kind of focus on this historic issue, and then maybe anticipating questions about what's planned to go in, just maybe some very high level discussion of that.
Okay. I think there's just a frame issue, which is that we are not large merchant builders that kind of zip in and roll out. We are in the community, and all the work we've done has been in the community. And Andrew has worked decades for ArtSpace doing adaptive reuse. I have done that in my career with ArtSpace and then on my own, and created in Linden Hills the Upton 43 building, which the city had recommended that I tear down and I wanted to save, which we did, and have two beautiful restaurants in there. Southwest Auto. Preservation is what we have done our entire lives, and we take this very seriously. So the thing is that we also live in the neighborhood. I've lived across the street from this very property for 22 years, and Andrew lived in Linden Hills for a number of years. So the neighborhood, its growth, its development is very important to us. So we are, my neighbors are here. They're all people that I see around, and there's kind of the two camps, those who are concerned with what comes next as a development, and that's not the right thing for this meeting, and those who have a fondness for Brenda Ueland. And what we'll show on the economic is that the weak correlation is too costly for us, but also too costly for the neighborhood. And then the other very important point is usually standing before you, a developer is asking for something to be given to them. It's zoned R2, we want R6, we want to build bigger than what we have. We bought this on the open market. It was an R4. It's been an R4 for 50 years plus. It's the city's intent always that this have higher density. And we are the ones stepping in to act on this. So we're not asking for something. We're asking that you don't take something away from us and from the neighborhood at large. So let me just jump in quickly to the economics. And we gave you a worksheet or a sheet we provided. And I'll rip through this as quickly as I can. But before us also is the idea that it may make sense to study this for 18 months. And for us, the economic factors just get worse over 18 months because our holding costs will be about $10,000 a month. So adding $180,000 to get 18 months out and say, now what? It's still going to be the same set of economic factors I'll present below. But the high level, it's 12,000 square foot parcel located in Linden Hills, mid-distance between the village and Lake Harriet. It, as I said, was not designated and was zoned R4. We paid $840,000 for that parcel, and our purchase price was $68 a square foot, which was actually lower than the $87 a square foot that land goes for in Linden Hills. And we've got footnotes and 50 pages of backup to all of this that will be in another packet. Our intent is to do a single lot development. There's also talk about how this plays out to other lots. We don't own the lot on one side. We do own the house on the other side, but it's a $1 million house and it's not going to be taken down. So the city had intended this always to be developed, and a very important thing is that the difference in tax value of if this house cannot be demolished, then doesn't have land value. It now has just kind of an old, out-of-service house value, which would be about $340,000. That difference between what the city can tax that and what they could tax our development is 30 times greater. And so we'll come back to that. But jumping in, one question is, could we do this as an as-is sale? In that, the current value as a house is $340,000. We paid $840,000. We would lose $500,000. The rehab and sell, so the thought is, well, if you fix it up, it could be better. The cost, again, of $840,000, by the time you rehabilitate it, there's structural issues as well as aesthetic issues and trying to get this thing up to a certain level. It would take about $1.3 million to get it to acquire it, repair it, and we've already acquired it, but repair it and rehabilitate the house. So then our loss pushes up to $805,000 under that scenario. So then we say, well, what about an as-is rental? It's been difficult to rent, and getting a longer-term rental, we have in there a rental income of $1,500, which is low, but we have a rental agent that has corroborated that. But even if you push the number up higher to $2,500, it covering monthly payments for financing and holding costs, we would still lose $6,300 a month. I'm sorry, $6,600 per month, every month, as an as-is rental. The same holds true of the rehabilitation and rental. That loss is even greater because of the greater cost. We would lose $7,625 a month under that scenario. I think, Andrew?
Hi, Andrew Commerce. I wanted to run through a few other options. New construction won't help. City design and historic review restrict what could be built behind the house. One owner-occupied ADU with 1,386 square feet. One contractor quoted over $400,000 for that, while a sale based on the same percentage, average cost sales price that John mentioned on the Linden Hills comps would result in a $44,000 loss. You add that loss to the $500,000 loss resulting from the value taken by the landmark status. And what land would we use for a cluster development? We control one smaller lot next door with a house we intend to keep. Buying adjoining land, all R4, would not remove the design and historic restrictions on what we could build. So the extra land cost
would only make matters worse. It's not reasonable. The idea to subdivide the lot referenced a 70-foot street front, but ours is only 50 feet wide. So you're going to get subdivision approval for a back lot that needs to access the public street somehow via 10-foot bans on either side of a landmarked house. It's not logical, nor is it reasonable to expect a meaningful buyer to, take that alley side house. Then the idea to create a literary arts center or retreat, first, the property is not zoned for commercial use. And secondly, zoning issues aside, the cost to purchase, renovate, and maintain would never be recovered by the operating revenue. And if proposing the art center would rent the house, the monthly rent would need to be more than $10,000, which for any rational organization would instead, choose to secure 10,000 square feet in an arts facility zoned and constructed for that. Again, not a reasonable idea, highlighted by the fact that it hasn't happened in the last 30 years during which it could have happened. Lastly, it would be unlikely you could gain permission to move the house, but even if you did, your loss would exceed $850,000 after the cost to purchase a new lot, build a new foundation, move the house, rehab the house, and sell it for market value. There are no reasonable alternatives to demolition. Demolition approval paired with a public art condition is the only way the council conducts a plan to generate property tax 30 times what it would be if landmarked and guarantees safe transfer of Brenda Euland's legacy to a more visible and inclusive commemoration, which I'd like to talk about. We commit up to $70,000 toward a public work of art to commemorate Brenda Euland's legacy. The art will be chosen by the community. We have funded Minneapolis public art before. I worked with Mary Altman, the city's public arts administrator, and local artists, including Marcus Young, the former St. Paul public arts administrator and a master at leading a process to brainstorm public art ideas. In 2012, together, we created Bee and Reverie, a sculptural installation of 500 cast bronze bees dispersed across the Twin Cities. I spoke with Ms. Altman and Mr. Young in the last week, and both would be thrilled to engage again with us and our community on this new public art project. We predict those in the community who revere Brenda Euland's legacy will lead us to create a more visible, accessible, and meaningful tribute than the house could ever be. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions for the applicant? Councilmember Goodman.
Mr. Gross, Mr. Commerce, thank you for being here today. Are you willing to sell the house to the neighbors for the price you paid for it, plus whatever your holding costs are? What if they could? How do you know that they could or couldn't raise the money that they would require to do what they want to do? If they were able to do that, we could broker a deal right here. Are you willing to sell the house to these neighbors to do what they want to do? It's a simple yes or no.
That's an excellent question. No, because we don't believe that this house and this location is where Brenda Euland's legacy should live. She's a writer. Her legacy lives in writing, and having some other thing is a better way than a privately owned home that someone can point to or whatever. The house was always intended to be developed, always. And in fact, Euland's owned estate sold it for land value, and it's always been sold as land value. And we bought it at land value, not for the house. So
it's about development. It's not really about Euland and the historical thing, because if they could do it, I mean, yeah, they're late to the game. I agree. They probably should have suggested this 2, 4, 10 years ago. But if they were able to buy it right now and do what they say they want to do and kind of call the question, you don't want to sell it anyway because you really want to develop it because of its R4 status.
that is true, and that's what the city has wanted out of that. And also, I don't believe they could get it done because they would have to get the necessary approvals. The neighbors would have to approve having a commercial center right there. They would have to get the funds. I don't think they would ever get that.
I think we've answered the clarifying question.
Yeah.
So that's fine. Okay, so we'll have an opportunity to come back up just again, since I think we'll have a lot of questions and testimony coming forward, but I want to make sure that we get a chance for everyone to speak. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Is anyone here wanting to speak in support of the appeal? Why don't you come up first just to kind of keep it clarified there, and then
Hi, my name is Kevin Kirsch. I own a condominium at 2700 West 44th Street. It's a few doors down from the residence in question. I read the 55-page report that was summarized earlier at this meeting, and I was going to summarize some of those parts that struck to me briefly that the interior space does not have any direct link to her significance as a writer or a professional woman. It appears to the property does not provide a lot of context that would be useful in interpreting her work or the impetus behind its production. The home does not hold significant architectural value. Saving the home, as the developers who I've never met before or seen in my entire life, is a lofty goal, but there is no known nonprofit interest that has publicly announced such an agreement. Removing the dwelling and adding a multi-dwelling house or building is appropriate, as everyone has said, because it is already zoned that way. And further, adding more housing is in line with the mayor's publicly stated agenda to add more housing and increase the residents in the city of Minneapolis. It seems to me that a reading room or dedicated library space in the Linden Hills Library or other location would do a better job of securing the author's legacy than an outdated dwelling. I wrote in my notes here that it seems like if the developer would announce a public donation to establish such a legacy, it might end this entire conversation. It's very gratifying to me to hear that they have done so. I don't mean to diminish the author's legacy or history. As an English major and lover of literature, however, I have never trekked to any author's house to find inspiration. I find inspiration from their work itself. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, would anyone else like to speak in favor of the appeal? Come on up, please.
Hi. I'm Chuck Duncan. I live in a neighboring Fulton neighborhood. And I'm in an awkward position because I'm a fan of Eric Utney, and I know he largely spearheaded this effort for historical preservation. And I appreciate many of his past works. I'm also a fan of Gross and Commer's architectural work and their preservation work in the past. The works at Upton 43, Rose Street Patisserie, they've the Andale Taqueria. It was a rehabilitated Embers restaurant that was definitely going to go to big box development, but instead it was rehabbed and set up for a local small business owner to expand their business, and they've done so very successfully and nationally recognized now. So I'm in an awkward position of opposing Eric on this particular issue. I went by the house the other day, and the retaining wall is crumbling into the sidewalk. The roof line is crooked. I mean, I'm not an architect. I wouldn't be able to determine what the rehab value, but I think those numbers have been. I suspect those numbers have been honestly stated. And I also am really sympathetic to honoring Brenda Euland's work. But to cast this house in amber instead of allowing the development from a local business owner from a pair of local business owners who are very, very sensitive to neighborhood issues and neighborhood personalities and support local small businesses. I think a more fitting tribute exists, and certainly money is available to provide a more fitting tribute at Linden Hills Library or Lake Harriet.
Thank you.
I'd like to see something more.
Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Would anyone else like to speak in favor?
I'm sorry, I'm not in favor, but I have to leave.
Please come on up. Thanks for doing that.
Thank you. My name is Joellen Halgo, and I have been the chair of the Linden Hills History Study Group for about 20 years. The history group has hosted 2 programs, one specifically on Brenda and one on Brenda and her mother, Clara. I am not here to speak for the history study group, but I am an active member. And I do want to thank the Historic Preservation Commission for the wonderful report on Brenda, and thank you for the process. Brenda, an author of notably acclaimed books and significant articles called Linden Hills, Neighborhood Her Home. The neighborhood and her life in Linden Hills was often described in her writings. The physical setting and the house are intertwined with what Brenda valued, love of community and the lake. The house is a good example of the housing stock at the time that the neighborhood was developed. The primary focus of the building's preservation should not be dependent on an architectural note, but rather the building helps tells the stories of residents and the community's past. Preserving homes of notable residents from the 20th century and notable women in particular requires actions when structures are threatened. There are no houses to recognize the significance of a former resident from the Linden Hills neighborhood. There are very few in the city or the state that recognize women. Minneapolis and Linden Hills needs to preserve historic structures that pertain to significant citizens. What would it take for a woman author, journalist, their home to qualify to be preserved? I believe that Brenda Ulen meets and exceeds those standards. And just aside, a plaque at the Linden Hills Library is not appropriate. There's Edith Frost would be a more appropriate person for that. So I do think that this warrants further study. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Okay, would anyone else like to come up and speak? We could just kind of go along here.
I don't know the password. I need to get this.
Why don't we have another person come up and speak in the interim? And then, okay.
My name is Constance Pepin. I live in Linden Hills. I hope you've had a chance to read the legal memorandum that was submitted to you. And I did just also bring copies of a one-page summary for you. I'm here. Numerous errors and misleading statements about Brenda Ulen and her house at 2620 were made by Preservation Design Works in their December 27th memo on the appellant's behalf. I have time for only a few examples. PVN says historic designation for the site's association with Ulen is not an appropriate or commensurate recognition of her contributions. In fact, her house is the only house among thousands of homes in Linden Hills that is actually designated as a potential historic resource in at least 2 surveys in 2005 and 2013, and it is cited in the Linden Hills Small Area Plan as worthy of study. PVN also says the house is not where Ulen completed her most influential work, and that the house is not directly associated with her significant written works. Some of Brenda's most significant writings were her essays. All of them were written late in her life at this house. Alice Kaplan writes her most important essay on making choices was written in this house. Her book about her mother, O Clouds Unfold, which is called Minnesota History at its Best, was written in this house. PVN says the house does not retain an interior space that can be directly linked to Ulen's significance as a writer and professional woman. Eric Utney, who is here, can personally attest that the house remains configured just as it was when Brenda lived and worked there. The second floor sunroom that was her writing studio and the living and dining rooms where she mentored countless young writers and hosted countless salons are just as she left them, even though the bookshelves have been removed. PVN says the house appears to provide little or no context that would be useful in interpreting Ulen's written work or the impetus behind its production. Numerous testimonials, some to be read by others today, will attest to the importance of Brenda's house. The house is revered by many and is included on tours by local history buffs and people visiting from all over. The statement that 2620 is a distressed physical structure is blatantly false. Another speaker will explain why.
Ms. Pepin, I just want to note that our 2 minutes is up.
I'm done. I was waiting for the next
okay.
to come up.
Sounds good. I was going to let you go through it.
Apologize.
Yeah. No, thank you, Mr. Christensen. Welcome.
Madam Chair, council members, my name is Anders Christensen. I'm a painter by trade. I'm the managing partner of Tiger Ox Painting LLC, a general contractor licensed by the state of Minnesota. We specialize in restoring, rehabilitating, repairing, maintaining, and fixing old houses in Minneapolis and St. Paul. I've been doing this work for 40 years. I've walked past the exterior of Brenda's house at 2620 West 44th Street. I have not been inside. I have viewed both sets of interior pictures. Over the years, I've restored houses after fires, after massive plumbing leaks, water damage, storm damage, flood damage, and years of neglect and deferred maintenance. Brenda Euland's house does not qualify as a distressed property. The stucco is in good condition. The trim is painted. It is not peeling. The exterior could be painted to improve its appearance, but is not necessary from a maintenance perspective. The inside pictures show a house in excellent condition. The basement needs some maintenance. Virtually all basements in older houses in Minneapolis need some maintenance. These repairs are not major or expensive. There may be things that need attention with this house, but you don't junk your car because the brakes don't work. You fix the brakes. The estimate of $300,000 to stabilize this house would be laughable if it was not public testimony designed to influence a public decision. There is no scope of work. This is not a professional estimate. It is designed to scare people without professional experience in working on older buildings. I can think of a dozen of my peers who would love to make these repairs. Realistically, this is a $20,000 to $30,000 tune-up. The $300,000 estimate is in the realm of alternative facts. The contractor has a financial relationship with the owner. This is a fraudulent estimate designed to give you cover if you proceed with demolition. The property manager states that Brenda's house is not rentable. Seriously, a single-family house this close to Lake Harriet can't be rented. This testimony is not credible. It does not reflect the actual condition of this house or the condition of the marketplace. Please don't base your decision on false testimony. You have seen the pictures of this house. In this case, your eyes can see the truth. Thank you very much for your time and
Thank
attention.
you. Wonderful. Next speaker, please. Come on up. Yeah, come on up, please. How many more people would like to speak? Okay. Yep, let's keep.
Hello, my name is Alicia Gibson. I live at 2105 Bryant Avenue South, which is not this particular neighborhood. Some have suggested that despite the fact that this home has been correctly identified as belonging to a historical figure, the rule should not apply in this case because the house was not the site where a major work was produced. I would urge everyone on this committee to consider the way this kind of narrow interpretation of the rules perpetuates the disappearance of women in history. I would also urge everyone in this committee to consider how we determine what counts as a major work. Brenda did, in fact, spend the last decades of her life in that house writing. For one, she worked and worked and worked on a biography of her mother, whose loss she was so unable to accept that she could never complete the project. In fact, I came to Brenda Euland through that unfinished biography of her mother, Clara, which was published after Brenda's death in 1985. The devotion to her mother one finds in this book goes a great way to explain her connection to Minneapolis and Linden Hills. Clara had been the most important, this is the mother, had been the most important woman in Minnesota politics for over 20 years when she died unexpectedly in 1927. She was killed by a motorist while stepping into her driveway near Lake Calhoun. Clara had been the state's suffrage leader, serving first as president of the Minnesota Women's Suffrage Association and later as the president of the Minnesota League of Women Voters. What is more, she led the charge for the establishment of kindergartens throughout Minneapolis, so thanks goes to Clara. And she was a stalwart champion of civil rights before it was known as such. 3 years after Clara's death, Brenda gave up the creative opportunities of New York City and returned to the neighborhood of her childhood, where she would walk the lakes and lanes filled with memories. It is as though Brenda returned to Minnesota to keep watch over the place her mother had loved so dearly. The mother story is important here because it is in that house that Brenda worked so diligently to preserve her mother's memory. It is also important because for so long, it is only through the achievements of their children and the work they did in their homes that many women find their footnote. Today, we have an opportunity to preserve the home of this writer, mother, daughter, and in turn honor the legacy of her remarkable mother, a true Minnesota hero. This opportunity must not be taken for granted. This is our cultural inheritance, and as the current political climate makes clear on a daily basis, we are not yet past the point of needing concrete reminders of women who both cherished their homes and their houses and persisted in asking for more than their meager portion of historical obscurity.
Thank you. Thanks. Next speaker, please. Did you want to come?
I'm reading a letter on behalf of Patricia Hampel, memorist. Oh, wrong microphone. Sorry. Linda Berg. I live in Linden Hills. I'm reading a letter on behalf of Patricia Hampel, memorist, Regent Professor, University of Minnesota. I visited Brenda more times than I can count in that house. I was welcomed as the next generation, as someone who wanted to be a writer. Her house was a campfire where I warmed my future. Preserving her house is about safeguarding the future, oddly enough. It is a mysterious fact that Minneapolis is the home to more literary publishing than anywhere outside of New York. We are a literary center, and we should act like one, honoring this essential writer who has done much to give the city the entanglements that build a soul right there on West 44th. Keep that beloved house from the wrecking ball. Find a way to use this treasured place for the creative life of future writers and readers. Turn it into a literary, not shrine, but library museum workspace for Brenda Euland Art Studio or something such name. I would dearly love to see that wonderfully situated place returned to its readerly, writerly use with the chance of meditative strides around her lake. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. Why don't you come on up, sir? Hi.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Minneapolis City Council. In addition to a letter that I sent to Aaron Hanauer, I'd like to offer these few remarks. I stood before the Minneapolis City Council during the 1960s or 1970s when Milwaukee Avenue would have been bulldozed by a public agency. But thanks to some research by Jerry Riley, who will be speaking later, Jerry found that common people's history on a street like that needed to be represented. So that's what we did, and thankfully I had a pretty important role in saving that. So it was common people's history that was being saved, but Brenda Euland is no common person. She's one of America's great writers, recognized by many other American great writers, as you've already heard. You've heard testimony as to the shabby character of this house. What's important is really in a house like Brenda Euland's, where she did her creative work, the very presence of the house is like a meta framework that gives its importance. It's unfortunate that our city, as I found in my 21 years sitting on the Minneapolis Heritage Preservation Commission, we face things like this quite a bit. We would ask for a study. Often, or not often, but occasionally during that study, someone would come out of the woodwork and say, this property has to be saved. Sometimes historic preservation needs time. And I think that that's what would be so helpful here. Also, during my time on the Preservation Commission, we would hear from my friends in St. Paul that they know how to honor their past. Minneapolis just knows how to tear down their past. But unfortunately, people are still saying that. You don't have to go very far to hear that. Just across the Lake Marshall Bridge, and that's where you'll hear these comments from a city that honors its great writers, such as F. Scott Fitzgerald, Patricia Hampel, and I'll add Garrison Keillor. So Please save the Brenda Ulen house.
Thank you. Next speaker, please.
Hello, my name is Brant Kingman. I'm a friend of Eric Utney's, a supporter of the arts and the continuation of properties that encourage contemplation and historic awareness. I want to read a letter in support of the preservation from Eric Reiter Strand, the Vice President of the Directors Guild of Norway, who's a writer and director of TV series and feature films. To eradicate this particular property would be an irredeemable violation of Norwegian American cultural heritage. It would violate the legacy of one of the most influential female writers of American modern literature, an act of ignorance I fear we would come to deeply regret. Brenda Ulen descended from a family of a great political and social importance in Norway. Her grandfather was a member of our parliament and remains a famous figure in Norway to this day, known for his advocacy of rights of the have and have-nots in our rural society. My own office actually sits in a building on Ulen's Gate, a central street in Oslo named after him. Brenda Ulen's home on 2620 West 44th Street in Minneapolis, in which she lived and wrote until her death, holds a central significance. Her keen interest in everything Norwegian and her writings about politics, sports, travel to the art of creative writing has given Norwegians an important and cherished outsider's viewpoint on ourselves and our country. Her legacy has continued to spread after her death. There is now a growing interest in Ulen's writing here in Norway, both in academic circles and in the creative arts. There are books written about her, news stories covering her, and films being prepared about her life, both documentaries and fiction. In Europe, we have a strong and proud tradition in our legislation of protecting our sites of cultural heritage, preserving the past for the benefit of our future. Please do not make the mistake of erasing the most important site that remains as a witness of Brenda Ulen's life and work. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. Do you want to come on up? Welcome, thanks.
Madam Chair and council members, a group of men want to build a parking ramp on West 44th Street across the street from my house. These are the words of Brenda Ulen in 1984. The first outrage they will commit is to cut down an utterly beautiful, flourishing maple tree. I don't know if it was the influence of Brenda's letter or not, but the group of men never built their parking ramp, and the house and the maple tree still stand. Though for how long? How much longer will we allow modest-sized houses and big trees to stand in front yards on this street and other long-lived streets in Linden Hills and elsewhere? The developers speak of return on investments and tax value, and they do this with impressive numbers and respected consultants to bolster their case for demolition. But who speaks for the house and the history that is embedded in that second-story lookout where Brenda wrote, always with one eye on Lake Harriet? Who speaks for the heritage of our city and the renowned woman writer who made her home, to quote again author Patricia Hampel, a campfire around which younger, aspiring writers warmed their futures? And who speaks for the people who have made their homes here and planted their maple trees and lived long among their neighbors? In her letter, Brenda speaks for her street and her neighbors. She says, "We love our street and everybody who lives on it, and we will not have it uglified." Here are some words from a more recent letter from yesterday. These are the words of Nina Archibald, Director Emerita of the Minnesota Historical Society and the woman responsible for saving the burnt-out shell of the Washburn A Mill and transforming it into the into the Mill City Museum that we all enjoy today. Now that was a distressed building. Regrettably, very few sites associated with women have been preserved, and even fewer that remind us of our literary leadership and our citizens' creative accomplishments. I understand that the city is under no statutory obligation to right this wrong, but wouldn't it be prudent and an admirable thing to do?
Thank you. I just want to make sure we have time for everyone.
I have
to
just
wrap
3
up.
sentences left.
Okay.
Thank you.
Of course.
But wouldn't it be a prudent and admirable thing if you upheld the recommendation of the HPC and allowed a study of the historical value to go forward? Brenda Euland's house is a touchstone and a landmark, and quite possibly a way for the city to foster its cultural life and reputation. As Nina Archibald concludes her letter, one step at a time, let's do the designation study and see what it yields. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. Anyone else? Welcome.
Good morning. Ann Laughlin, 4804 Dowling Street, Minneapolis. I'm reading two brief statements. The first one is from Nora Hall, author, co-chair of Walker Arts Center Producers Council, and Twin Cities Folk History Initiative community curator. Brenda's house in the unique Linden Hills neighborhood is a prime stop on the tours I give to any foreign guest who comes to town. It's so essentially Minneapolis. It stands as a jewel of our literary and social history, encapsulated in a place precious because it is still visible. Last summer, I went to Iceland and was thrilled to discover the home of the writer Halldór Laxness, 20 minutes outside of the old town center of Reykjavik. It's become a mecca for travelers and stands as a beacon for the lively intelligence and independent spirit of the whole country. And then from Phil Freshman, who's an editor and writer and Minneapolis resident. Like many, many others, I've read and loved Brenda Euland's book, If You Want to Write. Brenda was part of that exceptional Greenwich Village arts and intellectual scene that flourished between about 1910 and the early 1920s. I helped edit a book for the Minnesota Historical Society Press about her suffragist mother, Clara. Clara Euland was a major activist figure in Minnesota, instrumental in getting women the vote here and in helping give the 20th Amendment a big push toward adoption. Demolishing Brenda's Linden Hills house would remove Minneapolis's last physical link to a family who made vital contributions to Minnesota history and culture. I hope the house remains standing. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Who else would like to speak? How many more people would like to speak? Okay. You gotta come on up.
Thank you. Ronnie Talon, live in South Minneapolis. We have a chance in the city to get it right. It's time to honor our history instead of destroying it with yet another forgettable building. Brenda Euland is a founding mother of Minneapolis feminism and a great writer. I had the honor of meeting her, and she was an inspiration. I used her book, If You Want to Write, with my own English students, and it inspired them. She said, everyone is talented, original, and has something important to say. We need to honor that philosophy and her contribution by saving her house. We can always get another soulless place. But once Brenda Euland's house is gone, it is gone forever. That is how you will be remembered. Instead, be remembered for having the courage to stand up to the dollar signs. Brenda's house means something. It is about our collective history. What will replace it will mean nothing except to the people making money. They can always do that. Do it someplace else. Save Brenda's home and a piece of who we are. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. Come on up, please. We have about 10 minutes before we lose council members, so I just got to keep this moving along so we have time for motion and discussion.
That's not good. Madam Chair and council members, Peter Sussman, 6904 Mark Terrace Drive. As with Joellen Hago, who spoke earlier, I've been involved with the Linden Hills History Study Group for 20 years, but I'm not speaking on behalf of the group. And these comments are in supplement to the comments submitted to Aaron Hanauer that you have. 2620 West 44th Street is the only extant building associated with Brenda Euland. As you've heard, the Euland family house overlooking Lake Calhoun from 1890 was demolished in the mid-1950s. Brenda's house would become the second individual landmark in Minneapolis listed for its association with a significant woman, joining the Lena Olive Smith home at 3905 Fifth Avenue South. 55 pages of Brenda's autobiography include her invaluable descriptions of the early landscape and community of Linden Hills, beginning from her childhood in the 1890s. From the time of her return to Minneapolis in 1930, Brenda remained an influential presence locally. There would be an immeasurable value in maintaining a tangible link within the community and recognition of Brenda Euland. I want to note the opportunity to meet with and exchange views with the property owners and with Councilmember Palmisano over the past weeks, which has been appreciated. I look forward to their ongoing substantive engagement as these discussions move forward.
Thank you. Next speaker, please. Come on up. And I'm going to just go ahead and close the public hearing, within the next 5 minutes here. So,
my name is Sarah Lynn Romanishin, and I proudly live in the indefatigable and historic Wedge neighborhood in our Minneapolis, a city full of energy, ever-growing, and teeming with life. But what makes this city so very special? The people, of course, but what else? What feeds our people? The theaters, bars, and parks, they are simply facets of our infinitely evolving city. Interwoven with the activity, the people, and the land is our history, an integral baseline for the anthropomorphic mechanism we inhabit. I am not referring to history on a museum wall or a plaque. I mean the living, breathing history that surrounds us, teaches us, and supports us. It is the infrastructure that grows and stays with us from childhood to old age. The traditions of the city are our family. The city is our family. It is home. Dinkytown, St. Anthony Falls, West Broadway, the Wedge, Lake Street, Linden Hills. In neighborhood after neighborhood, we are destroying ourselves piece by piece. Strike that. We is the wrong word, because we, standing here before you today, are not the ones destroying the living history of Minneapolis. We are not the ones giving our city away for someone else's profit and the unquantifiably fickle concept of density. We want organic growth in this city, integrating the old and the new, learning from the old to create the new, and enjoying the old, allowing us to fully appreciate the new. Minneapolis power brokers have a history of ignoring our history, and it's time to learn from that history. This is a city for the generations, not a city for only one generation. I request that you deny the appeal to demolish the home of Brenda Euland. I also ask that you put this property forward for landmark status to protect a vital source of living history for the generations to come. The greatest cities are not a hotel, they are a home. Do the good thing and save our home. Thank you.
would anyone else like to speak? I'll ask this be the last speaker from the group, just so we have time to finish the work of the committee.
Hi, my name is Eric Utney, and I'm Brenda Euland's step-grandson. I've been working on a book on contract to Random House for 4 years about my life, but a big part of my life was Brenda's mentorship. She married my grandfather when I was 12, and even though they split up, we stayed connected until the day before she died. I lived in Linden Hills for 33 years in order to be near her. I started a magazine there that we had our offices in 3 different locations in downtown Linden Hills. I think council members have heard today that the first of 3 criteria that Brenda Euland was significant, historically significant, and we're getting so many testimonials daily from people who are attesting to that fact. I also think the slides you may have seen that were shown of the interior of the house by a rental agent just in July of 2015 shows that the house is in good shape, and a licensed architect attests to that, or licensed contractor, and that there are viable alternatives. And we've only had 10 days since the appeal letter was made available, and so we've been scrambling. We're getting literally many scores of letters attesting to Brenda's significance, but we need time to really come up with a viable plan. There have been a bunch of them put forward already, and there are, and the support, I feel confident that there is support for another incarnation of that house. It's a viable physical structure. It's not a distressed property. People from Minnesota Historical Society, Norway House, the Loft, Grey Wolf Press, the Schubert Club, the Walker Art Center, and the University of Minnesota have all declared their interest in making this a place that not just honors Brenda, but is a vital cultural resource for the city and the state. And I'd just like to point out that in PVN's testimony, they kept emphasizing that Brenda's major contributions were done before she lived in that house. But she lived there for the last 30 years of her life. And just like Emerson and Thoreau, she wrote essays. Yes, her books became popular, but her essays are her lasting legacy. And she wrote them in that house, as well as a couple of books. So we're going to, and just like Emily Dickinson and Edgar Allan Poe, Brenda's popularity and her significance is only going to become even more appreciated after her death. She was a treasure here, and let's give ourselves the time to do the study. That's all I'm asking for today. I can't lay out for you a viable plan. 10 days is not enough time, but I feel confident that we can do that. So please do the study, and we'll see you back here.
Thank
I
you.
hope.
Thank you so much. Okay, one last speaker, and then we'll close the public hearing.
Hi, my name is Beth Dalby, and I owned the home from 2002 until 2015, and I lived there until 2012. And I bought the home from Brenda's and her daughter Gabby's estate, and it was that transaction was handled by Bruce Carlson, who was the president of the Schubert Club and a very dear friend of Brenda's. And I would never stand up and try to debate whether she was a towering and very important figure here. I worship her legacy, and that's why I bought the house. And I'm a little thrown by some of the comments made today, but I kind of wanted to touch on three things that I think are important not to get lost in the discussion. And one of them is that when I heard it was being sold as a teardown by Bruce, he was marketing it as a teardown because of its zoning and because of the value being in the land. And at that time, the state of the house was very wrecked. I heard it was being sold as a teardown, and I just had this big romantic fantasy of swooping in and buying it and saving it and living in it and growing old and dying there like Brenda had done. And so I swooped in all right, and I worked very, very hard on restoring it to the best of my ability. And when I first contacted Bruce Carlson and introduced myself and said how much I love Brenda and I wanted to buy it and save it, he immediately cautioned me and said, you know, it has so many problems. And he listed the many problems that it had, many of that I had seen when I'd gone to the estate sale and many that I wasn't aware of. And after I moved in, Bruce visited me, and he would bring me Brenda paraphernalia and mementos, and he would tell me many stories about Brenda. And to be honest, that's just the piece that I want to put forward is it was that oral history for me that really allowed her legacy to come alive for me and that I try to share with everyone in celebrating Brenda's life. In order to make it livable, I made so many changes there. All of the ceilings swayed, the roof leaked. I had to keep garbage cans in the living room until I could put the new roof on. And I ended up tearing out every surface there except the original maple floors. I moved walls, I removed some walls, but I was doing my best to make it livable. I moved the entire front entrance to a different part of the front. I ended up having to tear off the front porch because it was falling apart. And when it was put back in, it was brought up to code, and it was all different materials. It was wood instead of stucco, and it was different pillars altogether that I had made. So I guess part of what I want to say is I made so many changes because that seemed like the right thing to do at the time, and it was certainly not to in any way denigrate Brenda's memory, but it was because I'd bought it in good faith as an R4 home. And as Bruce said, every time he visited with me, when he would tell me these wonderful, hilarious, outrageous sometimes stories about Brenda, he would kind of look around at my slow but earnest progress with the house, and he'd always remind me, you know, that if it ever gets to be too much for you, you can sell it for the value of the land. And I guess I just want to close by saying that it's very important to me to just be honest and say, if it had not been for a developer buying that property from me. If I had faced a burden of it being, if the rules changing while I owned it and it going from being an R4 to being historically designated, I'm not exaggerating when I tell you it would have financially destroyed me. And I'm just 2 transactions away from that right now. And I just think that that bears thinking about. And yet I want so much to be part of any and all efforts to promote and protect her legacy. I'm just not sure that it has to do with that property. But I do think that not enough people know about her, and she's a magnificent figure who should be memorialized forever.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. All right, with that, I will go ahead and close the public hearing. I'll see if my colleagues have any questions for staff or for any of the folks who spoke. Seeing none, is there a motion on this item? Councilmember Reich?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think we've had some very profound testimony today. And I think what we have before us is a very strong case that it really is about the person and the story, and not so much about the building. I think $70,000 a commitment to do that in art and other sort of treatments to historically remember someone in a way that's actually proactive and in the community in a meaningful, educational, and participatory way, maybe a better legacy. But it's still a close call. I think structures do matter. They can be touchstones. But so much of it, that building seems to be gone. But this is a person that should not be gone. And so again, I think as long as the understanding that approval of the request that we have before us, at this agreement, $70,000 is held, and I want that to be in the record. And I want, of course, testimony that lends more to the person than the structure to be part of the analysis that our legal team will put forward that would back this motion, if it prevails.
Thank you. Councilmember Reich, is there a discussion on that motion? Okay, and the clerk and the staff, city attorney.
Yes, Chair Bender, Councilmember Reich, just to clarify the motion, from what I heard or what I understand, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it would be to make the finding that that it is a historic resource, but there are no reasonable alternatives to demolition based on the presentation today and the information in the record. The council only gets to the mitigation aspects, which have been voluntarily proposed by the applicant, if you approve the demo. So the approval of the demo is what you attach, or what we would attach the mitigation conditions to in the findings that you would direct us to do. So the core of the motion, though, would be that you're making a finding that there are no reasonable alternatives to demolition.
Okay, does that sound correct? Thank you for the clarification. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So Councilmember Reich's motion is to allow for the demolition of a historic resource. As you might imagine, I'm not going to be voting in favor of that. I think the reason there's no reasonable alternative is because the developer doesn't want to provide a reasonable alternative, and that is they're allowed to do that. They own the property. But that's the reason there's no alternative. I think there could be an alternative. That's what the Heritage Preservation Commission has stated, that the building merits further study, and I believe it does merit further study, but it does get down to the bottom line of, well, will the developer sell the building to someone else who would do that? And they're in their own right to say they won't, and they've said it publicly. And I think we have to live with their decision. We don't have the right to take the property from them, and I don't think it makes sense to, quite frankly, waste everybody's time to do a study when they won't sell and then create a financial hardship for a whole bunch of other people. So it's with great regret that I will not vote to allow the demolition of a historic resource, but I understand where the developer is coming from.
All right, is there further discussion on that motion? I'll just note I really appreciate everyone coming, and I know the council member's office and staff have been really working to try to hear the ideas that are coming as alternatives to preserving the historic significance here. And I just know, we've had a high number, actually, I think, of these culturally significant properties, both coming forward as individual properties as well as districts. And they just create a little another wrinkle of consideration. We have a huge district coming forward soon, right? A proposed district in the Homewood area. We have cultural districts that we've approved in the Tilsonville area where property owners were able to opt out because we weren't designating the architectural history, but rather the cultural history. So I just wanted to note that it's not just in this one property where we're kind of discussing the back and forth between that physical property and the cultural significance. It's a citywide policy issue that we've been talking about a lot lately. So with that, all those in favor of Councilmember Reich's motion, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? No. So that motion carries. Let me just...
Madam Chair, I'll be fair. This is my fault. Okay. I have a noon meeting that has been moved back from 11 to noon. So I am creating a quorum problem.
Councilmember Johnson has to leave as well.
I'm just admitting that I'm the problem and not you as the chair. I think it was fair to have a lot of testimony, and I'm happy we did. Sometimes these meetings are 3 minutes, and sometimes they're 3 hours, and there's no way of judging. So I apologize, Madam Chair, for having another item on the agenda.
So I think the best thing to do here is to postpone a cycle, but I wanted to hear from staff because I know that the intention here was to have this item come before the council before the Community Connections Conference on April 1st, but we've lost quorum in the committee. So,
Madam Chair, unless there's any possibility of a quick vote, but this content probably requires some presentation and deliberation.
So my colleagues are leaving now, so we've lost quorum. So I got to move to postpone the item. Guys? Okay. We need to find two more council members so that we can move to postpone the item. So Councilmember Reich, I just want to make sure you're not leaving. Can you go back to them, please? And then Beth, why don't you go ahead with what you were going to say? No. Okay. All right.
Can I just ask a question of staff though?
We're going to postpone the item.
Okay.
We need one more.
Okay.
Just want to note for the public that we have to vote on the postponement of the last item, and we've lost quorum, so we're trying to get back quorum so that we can take a simple vote to postpone an item. Madam Clerk, we do not have quorum to allow us to move to postpone the item. I would take your advice about what to do. Just adjourn and we'll handle it at council.
I think what we have to do is simply what we would do if we met at the beginning of the meeting and you didn't have quorum. So you would simply have to establish the fact that you can't take action on anything else. And without talking to other people, it's possible you could add this item on Friday's council meeting to your actions if you wanted during that time. Otherwise, it has to go to another.
Okay, it sounds like the best option is for postponement as well, just because there's questions and comments on the motion. So we'll just go ahead and have the postponement action at council then. So I'll just note that we've lost quorum. We had a final item that we cannot hear, and we are adjourned.